Good day and welcome to another Vaisala Q&A video. Today our question and answer period is questions we didn't get a chance to answer from our last webinar, which was called Continuous Monitoring System Compliance with Part 11 and Annex 11. It's easier than you think. So we are joined today by our presenter from that webinar, our Senior GXP Regulatory Expert, Paul Daniel. Welcome, Paul.
Thanks, Janice.
So I'm going to jump right into questions. We've got some good questions here that we didn't get a chance to answer. But again, if you have any other questions, you can email Paul. We'll share that at the end of the transcript of this video. And you can also leave your questions in the blog comments below and we'll answer them. Okay, so ready, Paul?
Ready.
All right, first question. Why aren't accuracy checks required in a monitoring system?
Okay. For context, since we're in a blog and not in the middle of the webinar, accuracy checks are an Annex 11 requirement for data control, and it's really narrowly defined. Let me read it directly. It says, for critical data entered manually, there should be an additional check on the accuracy of the data. Now, in a monitoring system, I would argue that no critical data is entered manually. Since there's no manual entry of critical data, accuracy checks, as they're defined by Annex 11, just wouldn't apply. Now, if we entertain the idea of accuracy checks a little more broadly, well, it certainly sounds like a reasonable idea to check the accuracy of your data, right? And of course, a monitoring system like ViewLink has plenty of ways that it automatically checks data for accuracy. Let's see. First, the sensors are all calibrated. If a sensor has an expired calibration, that system sends an alarm. What else? When data is transmitted into the system, the data packs are checked for completeness to assure that those data packets haven't been changed or been altered in transmission. And for another control, when data such as parameters or thresholds or things like that, when these are entered into ViewLink manually, the input gets verified for format. For instance, an email needs to have an @ sign and have an ending that has a suffix with .com or .net or some other valid suffix. And all thresholds we enter, they need to be numeric characters, not letters, things like that. However, I don't consider those types of entries to be critical data, even though they are entered manually. For me, critical data is the monitoring data itself. I know it's counterintuitive, but please try to remember that this accuracy checks requirement from Annex 11 that we're interpreting for a monitoring system, it's just a requirement from Annex 11, and it's specifically about manual checks. I mean, maybe in the future we can do a new webinar on all the things that I think are wrong or are missing from Part 11 or Annex 11, but I wouldn't hold my breath on that one.
Okay, good. We'll move on to the next one. Audit trails need to be available and convertible to a generally intelligible form and regularly reviewed. Do you have any experience of what the authorities consider to be regularly? Is it annually, before batch release?
Okay, so an audit trail needs to be reviewed at an interval that makes sense for the process that's being reviewed. Usually this isn't going to be a time period per se, but rather a time frame that coincides with a review or an approval event for the data in question. As an example, if I'm approving a manufacturing process step that requires that the manufacturing suite was between, say, 10 degrees C and 25 degrees C, this would be a good time for me to check the audit trail to make sure no one had changed the data. If I were to wait a year before I reviewed the data, that batch of product would be long gone. I wouldn't be able to do anything but maybe start testing my retain samples or go so far as to recall the batch. Forgive the example, because as we know from the webinar, monitoring data is difficult or even impossible to change in a system like ViewLink. Maybe a LIMS system collecting data from a chromatograph would be a better example, because chromatograph data needs to be adjusted and manipulated so that we can understand it and evaluate it. So if I was in QC and I had just tested a sample with a chromatograph, the relevant audit trail record should be reviewed at the same time as that chromatograph report, so the approver can verify that the correct types of changes were made. So our question asker gave two choices. One was yearly, which is a defined time period, and the other was at batch release, which is a defined event. Personally, I would go with the defined event, but just what that defined event actually is will really depend on the computerized system you're working with and the process that you're using. In any case, a well-designed system should have a way to make sure that record reviewers and approvers can easily access the audit trail for the defined event for which we're reviewing that data.
Okay, thank you for that. And the answer seems to me like most good, truthful answers where it has a little bit to do with it depends. Context is everything. So here's our next question. Does ViewLink allow monitoring data? Oh, sorry. Does ViewLink allow data monitoring when the system is offline and informs for the record that the system comes back online?
Your ViewLink system is designed to be online all the time. That ViewLink server should run 24/7, and the ViewLink services should be running on the server all the time. If for some reason your monitoring server has gone offline and then comes back online, the following events for ViewLink, this is what will happen. First, the event log will record the recovery of the system so that we're aware that there's been a system outage. And second, on the next scan interval, the system will backfill any data that was collected by our data loggers, but didn't get transmitted to ViewLink because it was offline. So yes, it will resume monitoring. You won't lose any data, and you'll get a warning that the system had gone down.
So our last question for this video, do you limit the Part 11 validation process to your system or enlarge it to the whole facility?
Both, really. Let's explore that just a little. I think the specific words that Part 11 is using means that they're speaking directly to the validation of a single system. But before we can validate a single system, we need some stuff in place. We should have a master validation plan in place that defines the systems that need to be validated. We should have validation procedures in place that define how we do validation in our facility. And the side effect of the validation master plan and the validation procedures is that we really can't validate the single system without having a validation strategy in place for the facility. It's really like building a wall, you put down one row of bricks at a time. And validation of a system per Part 11 is up in the third or fourth row. It sits on top of the procedure brick. It sits on top of the policy brick, which sits on top of the validation master plan brick. The words of Part 11 do seem to be focused on the system only, but by implication, it must include the whole facility to some extent. And this would necessarily include some related systems like our network infrastructure needing to be qualified and our IT backup processes. Annex 11, by contrast, because it's a much more holistic regulation, it simply comes out and says all this more directly. But if we really think it through for Part 11, they are expecting us to validate all our related systems. And in this respect, the validation expectation of Annex 11 and Part 11 are really, really quite similar.
Okay, thank you for that. So that's it for this webinar question video. But again, if you haven't yet seen Continuous Monitoring System Compliance for Part 11 and Annex 11, please do click on the link below the video in the transcript, and you will also find two new application notes, one on Part 11 and the other on Annex 11. So we'll link those there as well. And thank you, Paul, for your time today. I want to invite our viewers to join us. We have an upcoming webinar with you, Paul, as well. Do you want to say a few words about that?
Oh, well, I can't say no now that you've called me out.
I'm sorry. Sorry.
We'll be looking at cybersecurity in a monitoring system. It's a little departure from our normal stuff where it's strictly about regulations. And if you've read any of the regulations, the GXP regulations about security, they're pretty simple. They say follow best procedures, manage your passwords. And we all know that the threats to our infrastructure and our computer systems are a lot more sophisticated and deeper than that. So we'll explore that a little together and have some fun understanding, what's behind the curtain when we're talking about cybersecurity, especially for a monitoring system.
Thank you, and sorry for the curveball, but I thought you would be able to talk about the webinar better than I would. So thank you again to viewers for watching this video, and please join us at our upcoming webinar and let us know if you have any follow-up questions in the comments below. Stay well.